The day my mother-in-law slid a printed amendment across the Easter table and asked me to sign my 6-year-old son out of his grandfather's trust, she had a pen waiting at my place setting. A ballpoint, black ink, placed parallel to the knife, like a piece of flatware she'd polished. My name is Serena. I'm 34 years old, and I'm an estate planning paralegal at a mid-tier law firm in Richmond, Virginia. I draft trust amendments and beneficiary designations for a living. I know what a properly executed document looks like, the way a jeweler knows real diamonds from costume glass. So when Patricia Ashford produced paperwork that would strip my son Miles of his equal share, roughly $121,250 in education, funds his own grandfather had set aside for him, I didn't gasp. I didn't reach for the napkin in my lap, or press my fingers to my mouth the way the rest of the table did. I opened my work bag, pulled out a manila folder, and set it next to my plate, the way I set folders on a conference table, every single day of my professional life. She had a pen at every seat. I had 6 colored sticky note tabs and a notarized letter in the handwriting of a dead man who loved my boy. Patricia thought she was chairing a board meeting. She hadn't counted on the fact that the woman she was trying to overrule had spent 2 years keeping the original executed document in a fireproof lockbox, waiting for exactly this moment. Welcome back to Karma's Keeper, where the people who were supposed to protect you sometimes turn out to be the ones you need protection from. If you've ever watched someone try to erase your child from a family that your child was born into, just because your child didn't look the way they expected, drop a comment. One word is enough. I want to know I'm not the only one. But let me take you back 7 years, to the spring I married into the Ashford family, and learned what it looks like when love comes with conditions nobody bothered to print. I grew up in Norfolk, Virginia, in a 2-bedroom apartment above a dry cleaner on Colley Avenue. My mother is Black. My father is Filipino. They met at a naval base event in 1988 and spent the next 30 years proving that the people who said it wouldn't last were wrong about everything, except how hard it would be. My mother worked intake at a community health clinic, filing insurance claims and medical histories 8 hours a day. My father repaired commercial HVAC systems and came home with his hands stained and his back aching. Nobody in my family had a trust fund. Nobody had a family attorney, or a beach house, or matching holiday pajamas. What we had was a kitchen table where the bills got sorted on the 1st of every month, and a metal filing cabinet my mother kept organized with color-coded tabs. Green for medical, yellow for school, red for anything urgent. That filing cabinet is probably why I became a paralegal. I watched her track every insurance claim, every school form, every tax receipt like the system would swallow us whole if she let one page slip out of order. She was right. Systems do swallow people. I just learned how to read their fine print before they could close around me. I went to Virginia Commonwealth on a partial scholarship, worked 20 hours a week at a title company filing deeds and lien releases, and after graduation got hired at a law firm that specialized in estate planning and trust administration. By year 2, I was sitting in on client meetings. By year 3, I was drafting trust instruments and reviewing beneficiary designations, while the senior attorneys billed their time and signed the signature pages. I sat in a conference room with leather chairs and watched families worth millions argue about who deserved what. I saw the daughter who got written out because she married someone her father didn't approve of. I watched the son who inherited everything because he showed up to Sunday dinner while his sister built her own life 2 states away. I heard the cousin who contested a will because she believed proximity was the same as entitlement. Those families taught me something most people don't learn until it's too late, and the signatures are already dry. Love and money are 2 different languages, and the people who confuse them are the ones who end up sitting across from me while I slide documents across a mahogany table. I met Derek Ashford at a friend's cookout when I was 27. He was standing by a grill, holding a spatula like he wasn't sure what to do with it, and when someone introduced us, he shook my hand and said, "I've been pretending to know how to flip burgers for 20 minutes, and nobody's caught on yet." I laughed. He remembered. A month later, on our 3rd date, he told me he'd been thinking about that laugh. That's the kind of man he is. Steady, attentive, the sort of person who refills your water before you notice the glass is low, and remembers the name of your dentist because you mentioned an appointment once in passing. He came from a family that looked like the cover of a holiday catalog. His mother, Patricia, was a retired school administrator who had run her district for 19 years and now ran the Ashford family with the same administrative precision, agendas, expectations, a clear chain of command with herself at the permanent top. His father, Richard, was quieter. A real estate investor who had built a modest portfolio of rental properties over 3 decades and spoke mostly in numbers, firm handshakes, and long pauses that meant he was thinking, not disengaging. Derek had 2 siblings, Kyle, the eldest, who worked in pharmaceutical sales and married a woman named Andrea, who always agreed with Patricia before Patricia finished her sentence, and Aaron, the youngest, who taught 3rd grade and kept her opinions behind her teeth at family gatherings, the way you'd keep a receipt you might need later. All 3 siblings had children. The Ashfords had Thanksgiving traditions, coordinated Christmas outfits, a rental cottage in the Outer Banks, and a photo wall in Patricia's hallway where every grandchild was framed in identical brushed silver frames. The first time I had dinner at the house, before the wedding, Patricia served roast chicken and asked me about my family. I told her about Norfolk, about my parents, about the apartment above the dry cleaner. She nodded and said, "That must have been quite an adjustment, going from that to law school." I hadn't said anything about law school. I'm not a lawyer. I'm a paralegal. But I smiled and corrected her gently, and she touched my wrist and said, "Of course, dear. Either way, Derek's lucky to have found someone so ambitious." The compliment landed like a document, with a clause hidden in the middle, warm on the surface, conditional underneath. Richard, sitting at the other end of the table, caught my eye and gave me a look that I didn't understand then, but would come to understand very well. It was the look of a man who hears something his wife says and files it without comment because he's learned that commenting changes nothing, but not commenting at least keeps the evening manageable. "I want to tell you about that wall. The first time I visited the house, 3 months before the wedding, I walked through the front hallway and counted 9 frames. Derek's nieces and nephews, arranged in birth order, each portrait taken at the same studio with the same dove-gray background. Patricia had walked me down the row and pointed to each one. "That's Cameron. He just started violin. That's Lily. She won the spelling bee. That's Owen. He's the quiet one." She knew everything. She curated those frames the way a museum curates its permanent collection. Deliberate, specific, and complete. When Miles was born, 2 years into our marriage, I waited for the 10th frame. I brought Patricia a studio portrait when he was 4 months old. Same gray background, same soft lighting. I'd matched it on purpose. She thanked me warmly and set the photo on the kitchen counter. A week later, I visited the house again. The portrait was on the refrigerator, held by a seashell magnet, not on the wall. I stood in that hallway, looking at the 9 silver frames, and then looking toward the kitchen where my son's face was pinned between a takeout menu and a dentist reminder card. I told myself it was temporary. She just hadn't gotten around to it. Miles turned 4, then 5, then 6. The photo never moved. The other grandchildren's frames were updated twice in that time, their school portraits swapped in each fall. Miles stayed on the refrigerator. If you asked Patricia, she'd tell you she simply hadn't found the right frame. She'd say it while touching your elbow. She'd say it while offering you iced tea. That's how Patricia operates. Warm hands. Cold math. The campaign started small, the way it always does. A comment at Thanksgiving when Miles was 2. Derek's sister Erin was holding him, and Patricia leaned toward Derek's other sibling, Kyle, and said, "He doesn't really look like our side, does he? Not to me, not to my face," but loud enough that I heard it from the kitchen doorway where I was rinsing a serving dish. I stood there with the water running, holding a ceramic platter, and felt something shift behind my ribs like a page turning to a chapter I hadn't expected. Then came the Christmas pajamas. Every year, Patricia ordered matching sets for the grandchildren. Every year, she ordered the right count -1. "I must have miscounted," she told me the first year, laughing and touching her forehead like she was embarrassed by a small math error. The second year, She didn't bother with an excuse. She handed me a gift bag with a toy inside and said, "I thought Miles would prefer this." By the third year, I stopped mentioning it. By then I understood the arithmetic. Miles was not on the wall because, in Patricia's ledger, he was not quite Ashford enough. He had my complexion, my dark curls, my mother's cheekbones, my father's wide-set eyes. He looked like me, and for Patricia, that was a line item that never balanced. There was a birthday party for Cameron, Kyle's oldest, the summer Miles turned 4. Patricia had ordered a custom cake. On the top, in fondant, she'd had the bakery recreate a family tree with the grandchildren's names on the branches. Every name was there: Lily, Owen, Cameron, Sophie, Nate, Ella, Margot. 7 names on 7 branches. Miles was not on the tree. I saw it before anyone else did because I walked into the kitchen while Patricia was transferring it from the box to the stand. She looked up and said, "Oh, Serena, could you grab the candles from the drawer?" As if the cake were wallpaper. As if the missing name were a font size she hadn't gotten around to adjusting. I grabbed the candles. I handed them to her. I went outside and stood on the patio and pressed my thumbnail into the pad of my index finger until the sharpness replaced whatever was building behind my eyes. Miles was playing in the yard with the other children. He was laughing. He didn't know his name wasn't on the cake. He was 4. He didn't know about cakes with family trees or branches that included everyone except him. But I knew. And I stood on that patio and understood, with the kind of clarity that arrives when you've been reading subtext for long enough, that this was not a series of accidents. This was a filing system, and Miles was in the wrong drawer. Derek saw it. All of it. I know he did, because one night, after another family dinner where his mother had compared the grandchildren's school photos and somehow skipped our son entirely, he sat on the edge of our bed and stared at the carpet. "She doesn't mean it the way it sounds," he said. I sat next to him and said, "Tell me what way it sounds, Derek." He rubbed his face with both hands and went quiet, the way he always went quiet when his mother's name came up. "Derek is a good man. I want you to understand that." But a lifetime of deferring to that woman had trained him to treat silence like strategy. He believed that if he didn't react, the problem would resolve itself the way a meeting adjourns, if nobody seconds the motion. It didn't. Problems don't adjourn. They carry over to the next session. Then Richard did something I didn't expect. 4 years ago, he called me at my office. Not Derek, me. He asked if I could meet him at a coffee shop downtown on my lunch break. When I walked in, he was sitting at a corner table with a legal-sized folder, and he slid it toward me before I even sat down, like a man who'd been waiting to hand it off, and didn't want to lose his nerve. Inside was a draft trust instrument, the Ashford Family Education Trust, funded with $485,000 from the sale of a rental property he'd held for 2 decades. The instrument named all 4 grandchildren as equal beneficiaries, 25% each. Miles was listed by his full legal name, Miles Derek Ashford. "I want you to look at the language before I sign it," Richard told me. He stirred his coffee, but didn't drink it. "I want Miles in there. I don't care what anyone says at Sunday dinner." I looked at him. He looked back. Neither of us mentioned his wife's name. We didn't need to. Some documents speak for themselves, and the one he'd handed me said everything about what he saw happening in his own family, and what he intended to do about it, while he still had the authority to do it. I reviewed the trust at my desk that afternoon. I flagged 2 minor issues in the distribution schedule, and one clause that mattered more than any dollar figure in the document, an anti-amendment provision requiring unanimous consent of all beneficiaries' legal guardians to modify the instrument after execution. As Miles's mother, I was his legal guardian. That provision meant nothing in the fund could change without my written approval. I circled it in pencil. I underlined it. Then I set the pencil down and sat there for a moment, understanding that Richard hadn't just named our son in a legal instrument. He'd built a wall around that name and handed me the key. The document was signed at the drafting attorney's office 2 weeks later. Richard gave me a certified copy. I slid it into the manila folder I keep in my fireproof lockbox, behind our passports and the title to our car. 2 months before he died, Richard called me again. He came to my office on a Wednesday morning. He wore a blue Oxford shirt and carried a single sheet of paper, handwritten, addressed to Miles. He asked me to notarize it. I read the letter standing at my desk. My hand stayed steady, because that's what you learn in this profession. Hold the document still, even when the words are opening something in your chest that you don't have time to process until later. I notarized it. I called a coworker as witness. I sealed it and put it in the lockbox beside the trust. Richard walked to the door of my office, paused, and said, "Someday you might need that. I hope you don't. But if you do, it's his." He left. 8 weeks later, he died of a heart attack on a Tuesday morning in October. He was 68. The first 6 months after the funeral were quiet. Patricia wore black to 3 family events, then started reorganizing. She cleaned closets. She replaced the living room curtains. She rearranged the photo wall in the hallway, updating frames, adjusting spacing. I noticed. I always notice spacing. She also started talking about Richard's assets with a tone I recognized from my conference room. The voice of someone who is not grieving but taking inventory. The accounts need consolidating. The paperwork needs reviewing. I've been speaking with the family attorney. Every sentence was delivered the way she used to open faculty meetings. Agenda first, feelings after, or in Patricia's case, feelings never. It was my colleague Dana who said it aloud first. Dana is a senior paralegal, 15 years in trust and estate work, with reading glasses she wears on a beaded chain, and a rule she taught me during my first month at the firm. When a surviving spouse starts using the phrase, "the family attorney," without naming a specific person, they're shopping for someone who will tell them what they want to hear. She's going to try to modify the instrument. Dana told me over lunch one Wednesday. She said it the way she'd read a case summary. Flat, factual, certain. She's going to find someone who'll draft an amendment and hope nobody reads the original instrument. I told her she was being pessimistic. Dana looked at me over those reading glasses and said, "Serena, I've been doing this since before you finished undergrad. I'm not pessimistic. I'm experienced." I went back to my desk. I opened the lockbox that night and checked that the manila folder was still there, still tabbed, still in order. It was. I started carrying it in my work bag. Not every day, but most days. The way I carry my notary seal and my building ID. Because preparation is not paranoia, it's professional practice. If you've ever had someone in your family treat your child differently because of how they look, and had everyone around you pretend it wasn't happening, hit subscribe. Because what happened at that Easter table is the part nobody saw coming. Easter Sunday, 6 months and 12 days after Richard passed. Patricia hosted at her home, the way she always did. I almost didn't go. I sat in our kitchen that morning with the manila folder in my work bag by the door, and told Derek I had a headache. He looked at me, and I looked at him, and something passed between us that wasn't a conversation but was close. "We should go," he said. Not because he wanted to. Because he didn't know how not to. I ironed Miles's blue button-down shirt. I put on a dress I hadn't worn since a firm holiday party. I dropped the folder into my bag the way I'd been doing for weeks, and we drove to Patricia's house in a silence that smelled like the stargazer lilies she always ordered for Easter because Richard used to buy them for her, and now she bought them for herself. 18 people. 2 tables pushed together in the dining room. The good china with the gold rim. White linen napkins folded into triangles. A seating chart written in Patricia's handwriting on a card at the entrance to the dining room, just like always. I found our names. Derek, Serena, Miles. Seated at the far end, near the kitchen door. Kyle and Andrea were at the center, beside Patricia's chair. I noted the arrangement the way I note signature placement on a contract. Who's closest to the authority, and who's been positioned near the exit. Andrea greeted me with a hug and a compliment about my earrings that felt like a weather report. Technically warm, functionally empty. Kyle shook Derek's hand and said, "Good to see you, brother," without making eye contact with me. Erin was quieter. She found me in the kitchen while I was filling Miles's water glass and said, "Mom's been on the phone a lot this week. With someone. I don't know who." She said it the way she said most things. Carefully. Looking at the glass and not at me, leaving the interpretation to whoever was willing to pick it up. I picked it up. I thanked her. I went back to the table. He sat between me and his father and ate his ham and scalloped potatoes without complaint, and then started drawing on a napkin with a crayon he'd brought in his pocket. Superheroes. He always draws superheroes. I loved watching him do it, because it reminded me of my father, who used to sketch circuit diagrams on restaurant napkins while we waited for our food. Patricia waited until dessert. She stood, tapped her water glass with a spoon the way you'd call a meeting to order, and announced that she had been reviewing the family trust with the family attorney. She said the instrument needed to be updated to reflect the family properly. Then she walked around the table, placing a printed document at every seat. One at every place setting, like programs at a school recital. When she placed one in front of me, she looked at my hands, not my face. I picked it up. I read it the way I read every document that crosses my desk. Recital's paragraph first, then definitions, then distribution schedule, then execution requirements. It took me 90 seconds. The proposed amendment removed Miles as a beneficiary and redistributed his quarter share among the other 3 grandchildren. The drafting was template quality, competent but generic, and whoever had prepared it had either never seen the original instrument or had chosen to ignore its most important provision. The anti-amendment clause was not cited. It was not addressed. It was not even acknowledged. They had written around it the way a driver swerves around a pothole without noticing the bridge ahead is out. Patricia sat back down and addressed the room. "I want to be clear that this is about honoring Richard's legacy," she said. "We need to be honest with ourselves. Miles is a lovely boy, but he isn't an Ashford by blood. Richard would have wanted this to stay in the family." I looked at Derek. His jaw was set. His hands were flat on the tablecloth. He was doing what he always did, going still, going internal, waiting for the moment to pass the way weather passes, as if silence could adjourn a meeting nobody else had called. His brother Kyle studied his fork. His sister Erin studied the printed amendment. The spouses stared at different walls. 18 people, and the only sound in that dining room was Miles's crayon pressing softly against a paper napkin. 7 seconds. I counted. I always count. It's a habit from depositions, from client meetings, from every moment in my career when I've needed to let a silence do work that words would only weaken. 7 seconds of no one breathing fully. I watched Kyle reach for his water glass and then stop. I watched Andrea look at her husband for a cue and receive nothing. I watched Erin fold her napkin in half, then in quarters, pressing the crease with her thumbnail. And I watched the matriarch, at the head of the table, surveying the room with an expression I'd seen on the faces of senior partners during settlement conferences. Total confidence that the outcome had already been decided, and this meeting was merely the ceremony of agreeing. Then I reached into my bag and withdrew the manila folder. You could hear the clasp open. In a room that quiet, metal on metal sounds like a sentence beginning. I set the folder on the table beside my plate. Her eyes moved to it. She recognized it the way you recognize a document that doesn't belong in the room you've arranged, with a flicker of attention that tries to look like disinterest but lands closer to alarm. I did not plan a speech. I did not rehearse a confrontation. I'm a paralegal. When I encounter a defective document, I don't get angry. I get specific. I opened the folder. I removed the certified copy of the original trust instrument. I turned to page 11, where the anti-amendment provision was highlighted in yellow, and I read it aloud. I read it the way I read clauses in client meetings, measured, clear, with no inflection that might suggest opinion. The clause stated that any modification to the trust required the unanimous written consent of all beneficiaries' legal guardians. As Miles's mother and legal guardian, my signature was required for any amendment to take effect. I let the words settle. No one spoke. Then I removed the second document, Richard's letter, handwritten on cream-colored stationery, notarized, witnessed, dated 2 months before he passed. I unfolded it carefully and read one sentence aloud. Miles is my grandson. Anyone who says otherwise is choosing their comfort over the truth, and I did not fund this trust to reward that choice. Her face changed the way a document changes when you pull the wrong page from a collated stack. Everything that was aligned a moment ago suddenly isn't. The warmth left her expression first, then the composure. Then the posture. She leaned forward and placed both palms flat on the table, as though she needed a surface to hold her upright. I slid the original trust to the center of the table. I'd marked every relevant provision with colored sticky note tabs, the same ones I use at work. Yellow for distribution language, pink for execution requirements, green for guardian consent. I said, "This amendment is legally unenforceable without my consent as Miles's guardian. I do not consent, and for the record, the attorney whose name appears on this trust has confirmed that no one from this family has contacted his office regarding any modification. So whoever Patricia consulted, it was not the person who drafted the instrument you're being asked to alter." She tried 3 approaches in the next 4 minutes. First, guilt. "Serena, I'm just trying to do what's best for this family. You're making this adversarial." Her voice was still warm, professional, the voice of a woman who had spent 2 decades managing difficult parents at school board meetings. Then, tears. She pressed a cloth napkin to her eyes and scanned the table for support, but the people she was looking at were reading the sticky note tabs on the trust document, and not one of them reached for her hand. Then, recruitment. She turned to Aaron and said, "Aaron, you understand what I'm trying to do here, don't you?" Aaron looked at the handwritten letter. She looked at Miles, still drawing on his napkin, crayon in his left hand, completely unaware that 18 adults were deciding whether he belonged to them. Then Aaron said, quiet and plain, "Mom, Dad wrote his name in the trust." Nobody picked up the pen. Not one person at that table signed the amendment. Derek stood up. Not dramatically, not loudly. He pushed his chair back, and he said 9 words in a voice I had never heard him use before, quiet and level, and completely finished with the conversation. "Mom, Dad put Miles in the trust. That's the end of it." I understood in that moment what those words had cost him, because a man who has spent his entire life going silent when his mother speaks does not break that pattern without something breaking open inside him first. I closed the folder. I left the certified copy on the table. I left the trust document with its colored tabs between the dessert plates and the crystal vase. Let them read it. Let them sit with the handwriting of a man who saw what was happening in his own family and used the only language that outlasts denial. Legal language, notarized, witnessed, and filed. If this story is reaching somewhere real for you right now, share it with someone who needs to hear it, because the part that comes after is the part nobody ever talks about. I took Miles to get ice cream. There is a shop on Carey Street with a green awning and a chalkboard menu and a bench outside where you can watch people walk their dogs in the late afternoon sun. He ordered strawberry with rainbow sprinkles. I ordered black coffee. We sat on the bench, and he showed me the superhero he'd drawn on the napkin at dinner. The character had a cape, boots, and a briefcase. "That's you, Mom," he said. "You carry the folder." I looked at the drawing. I looked at the coffee in my hands. I did not feel victorious. I did not feel satisfied. I felt like someone who had just proved in front of 18 people that her son belonged to a family that should never have required proof. The drive home was 15 minutes. My boy fell asleep in his car seat with strawberry ice cream on his chin, and the napkin superhero crumpled in his fist. Derek drove. I held the coffee cup, now empty, and stared at the road. Neither of us spoke until we pulled into the driveway, and then Derek turned off the engine and sat there with his hands on the wheel and said, "I keep thinking about the pen at every setting." "She really thought everyone would just sign," I said. "That's how it works in her world. You present the agenda and the room falls in line." He shook his head. "Not anymore," he said. I carried Miles inside, changed him into pajamas, and tucked him into bed. Then I sat in the hallway outside his room with my back against the wall and my hands in my lap, and I cried. Not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet, thorough release of something I'd been carrying since the first time I stood in Patricia's hallway and counted 9 frames. The following week was quiet, in the way that aftermath is always quiet. No calls, no texts. The family group chat went dark. Patricia didn't reach out. Neither did Kyle. Andrea, who had never sent me a message that wasn't logistics about a family event, sent nothing. The silence had a specific texture, not hostile, not apologetic. embarrassed. I recognized it because I see it every month in my conference room after contested trust readings. The family that just learned the deceased's wishes don't match their assumptions goes silent for about 10 days before someone cracks. Erin cracked first. She texted me on a Thursday evening. I should have said something years ago, not just about the trust, about the pajamas, the photos, all of it. Miles is Dad's grandson. That was never a question for anyone who was paying attention. I read the message 3 times, standing in my kitchen with the phone in one hand and a dish towel in the other. I wrote back, "Thank you, Erin. That matters." I did not add more. There was nothing else to add that the message didn't already carry. Patricia attempted one more approach 2 weeks later. She called Derek and suggested that perhaps they could revisit the trust discussion at a smaller gathering, without so much emotion. He told her the fund was Richard's decision, that the language was clear, and that the discussion was closed. He said it once. He did not repeat it. He let the silence afterward do the rest. I was standing in the hallway when he hung up, and he looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen on his face in 7 years of marriage. Relief. "I should have done that a long time ago," he said. "You did it now," I told him. That was enough. I consulted the original trust attorney the following month. His name is Howard Pratt, and his office is on Grace Street in a building with tall windows and hardwood floors that creak when you walk to the conference room. He's been practicing estate law for 31 years, and he has the calm, unhurried manner of someone who has watched families do their worst across a conference table and no longer flinches. He reviewed my copy of the trust. He confirmed that the instrument was properly executed, that the anti-amendment clause was enforceable, and that any future attempt to modify the trust without my consent as Miles's guardian would be void on its face. Whoever drafted that amendment didn't do their due diligence, he told me, turning to the provision and tapping it with one finger. This clause is clear. It's not ambiguous. It's not open to interpretation. It's a lock, and your signature is the only key. As he walked me to the elevator, he paused with his hand on the doorframe and said, "Richard called me 2 days before he passed. He wanted to confirm the trust was airtight. He told me someone might come for it. He asked me to make sure the walls would hold." I thanked Howard. I shook his hand. I walked to my car in the parking garage and sat in the driver's seat with the manila folder in my lap, thinking about a man who spent the last weeks of his life reinforcing a legal structure around his grandson's future, because he knew exactly who inside his own house would come with a pen and a proposal to tear it down. Richard never told me he was worried about his heart. He never told me he thought he was running out of time, but he notarized a letter. He confirmed a clause. He called his attorney. He did everything a man does when he wants to make sure his voice carries past the room he's standing in. I learned something in those months that I want to leave with you. The people who question whether your child belongs are never doing it for the family. They're doing it for the version of the family that only exists in their own reflection. Richard Ashford looked at Miles and saw his grandson. Full stop, no amendment required. Patricia looked at Miles and saw a complexion that didn't match the frames on her hallway wall. The difference between those two views is the difference between love and inventory. One is a trust you fund. The other is a ledger you keep. I know which one I'm raising my son inside. That's my story. My son is 8 now. He still draws superheroes with capes and briefcases. The manila folder is still in my lockbox, tabbed and ready, though I hope I never have to open it again. His photo is still not on Patricia's wall, but it's framed on mine. Studio portrait. Brushed silver frame. First in the row. Have you ever had to prove that your child belonged somewhere they should have been welcomed without question? Tell me. Drop a comment. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And hit subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.